Most people think a genius comes from talent or genetics, but spend enough time studying the lives of great thinkers and you'll notice something striking. The people we often call self-taught geniuses didn't simply read more books than everyone else. They read differently. In this video, I'm not only going to share 12 books that shaped 6 extraordinary minds, but I'm also going to show you how you can read them the way they did, so you can build a mind that operates at that level. Starting with Euclid's Elements. Leonardo da Vinci had almost no formal schooling, no university, no structured mathematical education. However, evidence suggests this book was a major source of inspiration for him, arguably one of the most influential books in the history of human thought. He didn't read it to become a mathematician, he read it because he realized something profound. If you can understand how lines, angles, and shapes relate to one another, you can understand almost anything. Perspective in painting, geometry. Engineering a bridge, geometry. Anatomy, proportions, still geometry. Every time he sketched a flying machine or dissected a cadaver or designed a fortification, he was applying the mental structures he learned from Euclid. The lesson here is simple. Pick one foundational text in your field that everything else rests on and reread it until it feels like second nature to you. One foundational book is often worth 10 surface level ones. But Euclid wasn't the only text that shaped Leonardo's mind. He was equally obsessed with the second book on our list, an ancient Roman treatise called On Architecture by Vitruvius. If you've ever seen his famous Vitruvian Man, that drawing comes straight from this book. Vitruvius argued that the human body embodied the geometry of the cosmos. Leonardo took that idea seriously. Instead of using Vitruvius as a manual on how to build buildings, he used it as a lens for thinking about balance, harmony, and design itself. Reading this book didn't just shape his art, it shaped the way he saw hidden structures in everything around him. And so this is the second lesson. Read outside of your domain. Let an ancient architect teach you how to design systems. Let a philosopher teach you how to build a business. It's this kind of cross-pollination where breakthroughs happen. And Benjamin Franklin is another perfect example of this. Franklin had almost no formal education, yet he became one of the clearest, most effective writers of his time. How? He built his own writing course long before such a thing existed. He would take essays from our third book on this list, The Spectator, which, although it wasn't originally a book, was a series of essays that later became compiled into one. He would study their structure, and according to some sources, he would outline them, hide the originals, and recreate them from memory. Then he'd compare his version to the original and study every difference. That series of habits, imitate, reconstruct, compare, transformed him. And this is something you can apply immediately. Find one masterful piece of writing, coding, design, or argumentation. Break it down. Rebuild it. This is how you convert your admiration for a work into actual ability. But Franklin didn't just train his writing, he trained his character. And he credited our fourth book on this list, Plutarch's Lives, to a great deal of his own personal development. To him, these weren't heroic myths. They were case studies in ambition, power, failure, and integrity. Franklin read them to understand why people rise and fall, what qualities they cultivate, what weaknesses they ignore, and how those internal traits eventually shape their external fate. Reading biographies this way teaches you to think in cause and effect rather than vague inspiration. Anytime you read about someone you admire, ask, what habits built this person and which ones destroyed them? That way you can learn to perfect your own character. But when you think of self-taught minds who built not just personal mastery, but instead the kind of moral, civic, systemic change that reshapes a nation, Nelson Mandela sets himself apart. He spent 27 years imprisoned on Robben Island, and during that time, he didn't wait for knowledge to come to him. He actively pursued it. One of the books he returned to again and again was our fifth book here, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. One of the reasons he loved this book was because of the character General Kutuzov, the soldier who accepts that history, circumstance, and his people are stronger than any single ambition. And this mirrored so much of what Mandela himself was living. Another book Mandela read and referenced is the sixth book on our list, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, a novel he said helped him understand the resilience of the oppressed, the hidden structures that keep people down, and the ways human dignity fights back under impossible odds. From these readings, he cultivated a habit that any self-learner can adopt, reading not for comfort, but for strategic empathy. He used war and peace not to escape prison, but to understand leadership under pressure, the psychology of defeat, and the mechanics of systems that outlast individuals. He used The Grapes of Wrath not for literature's sake, but to deepen his sense of the structural forces, poverty, injustice, class, that shape the fate of millions. The takeaway is simple. Pick one book that makes you uncomfortable, one that forces you to step outside your bubble and see how systems operate beneath the surface. Read it slowly. Treat the characters as case studies. Then ask, what structural insight from this book can I apply to my own field or simply to my life? And so fiction is powerful, but it can help us go even further than this. The famous scientist Nikola Tesla, for instance, read poetry and philosophy to inspire some of his greatest inventions. He fell in love with our seventh book here, Goethe's play Faust, which deals with themes of human striving, temptation, and redemption. For Tesla, great literature wasn't simply entertainment. It was fuel for creativity. It sparked his imagination and gave emotional texture to his engineering ideas. You see, I've often underestimated the power of fiction for technical thinking myself, but don't make that same mistake. And the reason is that sometimes the spark you need isn't in a manual or in the technical explanation itself. Instead, sometimes it's in a line of poetry that subtly shifts your perspective. And our eighth book here, Candide by the French philosopher Voltaire, is a perfect example of this. You see, Tesla claimed that by the age of 17, he had read the entire body of Voltaire's works. In Candide, Voltaire lays out a satire which dismantles blind optimism and forces the reader to confront reality as it is, not as they wish it to be. It's a sharp, witty, almost deceptively simple story that attacks every form of dogma, religious, philosophical, political, with a kind of fearless clarity. And you can see why this mattered so much to Tesla. Candide teaches you not to accept heralded explanations, not to trust comfortable narratives, and not to confuse hopeful thinking with rigorous thinking. It builds a habit of skepticism that Tesla carried into his engineering, the instinct to question everything, test everything, and refuse to bow to any idea simply because it came from an authority. And you can imitate this strategy yourself. Choose one author whose mind you want to absorb. Not a single book, but an entire worldview. Read them deeply enough that you start anticipating their arguments or quietly debating with them. That's how you build a truly educated perspective. But make no mistake, nonfiction books are still foundational to our self-education. The physicist Richard Feynman, for instance, challenged himself with books above his level, including our ninth book on this list, Paul Dirac's Principles of Quantum Mechanics. When Feynman was young, he attempted to read this book, a book so difficult that even expert physicists find it tough. Needless to say, he didn't understand it at all, but he kept trying. Page after page, year after year, he returned to ideas that were far above his level. And by wrestling with those ideas long before he was, quote unquote, ready, he eventually built a mind capable of handling them. And this is one of the most crucial habits any self-directed learner can build. Read above your level, because doing so stretches the boundaries of what your brain can process. But your brain is an amazing organ. The more you challenge it, the more it rewires and adapts. Later in his life, Feynman distilled his own understanding into our 10th book on this list, the now famous 6 Easy Pieces. The book is special because it is a masterclass in summarization and clarity. Feynman's true genius was his ability to take a complex idea, strip it down to its essence, and rebuild it so cleanly that anyone could follow it. For self-taught learners, this book represents the habit that made him who he was. After you learn something, explain it in plain language. If you can't do that, you don't really understand it yet. Go back and refine. And this is a habit I teach to my own students as well. But then what about books that challenge not only your raw mental ability, but your mind itself. Well, that takes us to our 11th book here, Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. The artist Frida Kahlo had a reading life that was far more intellectually intense than most people realize. Her reading of many of Freud's works, including likely The Interpretation of Dreams, inspired many of her great artistic works, including her Moses, also known as Nucleus of Creation. It's a sprawling, symbolic tapestry of mythology, psychoanalysis, and human origins. And so Kahlo wasn't reading Freud to understand some technical theory. She was reading him for what is called phenomenology, which in philosophy is what you could call the study of raw experience. And this is a lesson for you if you create anything. Read a book that unsettles you, the one that challenges you to think outside the paradigm you've established and perceive reality in a completely different way. That discomfort is often where originality and creativity begin. Kahlo was also devoted to Marxist writings, not as abstract political theory, but as a way to understand suffering, illness, labor, and identity. Her painting, Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick, literally shows Marx's ideas supporting her broken body, almost like a protective force. And that takes us to the 12th book on this list, Das Kapital by Karl Marx. Whether or not she read every page of Das Kapital, there's no question that Marxist texts shaped her worldview. But most people make the mistake of thinking you have to be a Marxist to read something like Das Kapital. But that's not true at all. In fact, you gain potentially the most insight from reading books that challenge your worldview, not just from the ones that reinforce it. Because after all, let's not forget the true function of reading. It's to get you to do something most people rarely ever do, and that is using your mind to think deeply and critically. Which of these 12 books will you read first and why? I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact not only on your own life, but also on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.